Well, welcome back to the midweek Bible study. And we are right now in the throes of the Thanksgiving season. This is going to be posted the day before Thanksgiving. You may be viewing it years later, but that's the immediacy. And we want to wish you a happy Thanksgiving, but we also want to love on those that have nowhere to go this time of year. You are not under obligation to feel bad. You're not under obligation to feel lonely. The world will try to make it that way with all the pictures they paint of what a Thanksgiving should look like and what the menu should look like. You don't have to play those games. You can enjoy your day. You can enjoy a day where you can watch the Detroit Lions lose, which is a tradition, or whatever you want to do. Don't let the world decide for you on what day you've got to feel lonely and bad, right? So for the rest of you, happy Thanksgiving with family. Everybody loves, the two favorite things are when the family comes and then when the family goes. So, right? It's a great time. Hope you'll enjoy today. Our professor here, Dr. Rick Hunter, is going to start us off by reading a story which is a difficult story. It has caused so much pain for so many people, including myself, because of the phrasing. And we look back at it from 2,000 years away and think, oh, I wish it had been said different. But Mark chapter 7, starting at verse 24, if you could take that, brother.
Well, beginning at verse number 24, from there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and he entered a house and wanted no one to know it, but he could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. But Jesus said to her, "Let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs." And she answered and said to him, "Yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs under the table eat from the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For this saying, go your way, the demon has gone out of your daughter." And when she had come to her house, she found the demon gone out and her daughter lying on the bed.
All right. We love miracles, but that's not what gets our attention. He went to the vicinity of Tyre. First of all, Jesus wasn't afraid to go among the non-Jews, the Gentiles. He wasn't afraid to eat with them, drink with them. He wasn't afraid to be around them. And in the first century, you are who you eat with. So that was a big thing. But he didn't want anybody to know it, which I find fascinating, but it's not really explained. And then he couldn't keep his presence secret. If you're wondering why you couldn't keep they lived on top of each other. And I'm going to put that up. We're good. They lived on top of each other. And you didn't have closed windows and closed doors like we do. And therefore, anytime you moved, people knew you were there. And so people start to gather. As soon as she heard about him, this woman whose little daughter, that always gives me the word little. I have a daughter who is now grown up with her own family and doing wonderful. But I noticed there was a difference every time I looked at my little girl as opposed to my little boy. With my little girl, my heart broke. With the little boy, I laughed. You know, he was going to be tough and rough, and he's going to do it. But my little girl, I see this big bad world. Well, she's a tough woman. She can handle the big world, and she's a Christian. But when I see that, my heart hits. And then she had an impure spirit. We don't know what that is. The word impure, I don't think is actually in the Greek, is it? I think they put that in because of context. Most of the time, it'll talk about a spirit or an angel, and you have to get from the context whether it's good or bad. And this one is obviously an unwelcome one. And she asked Jesus, to drive this demon out of her daughter. So first of all, here's a woman not in the covenant, not a Jew, and yet either in faith or desperation. And we've all had this in our lives where you tried all the doctors, and now desperation, what do we do? And then he says something which seems incredibly insulting. What do we do with this response of Jesus? We were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
So, I look at it and I say, well, he's calling them dogs. But you brought up that there are different words for dogs, and there might be a subtle meaning here. Can you explain that?
The just like in many languages, well, in all languages, when you translate out of one into another, you have to be always aware of euphemisms. You have to be aware of parallels. You have to be aware, and that's really one of the significant reasons why it's so important when translators start looking at texts like the Bible and trying to take it into a language. Just like we know, many times they have to live among the people, especially if it's a language where it's very isolated. And I've read several occasions where parts of text have not even been translated because they cannot find parallels that keep it clear enough, so they just have to do the best that they can. And unfortunately, we have to do the best that we can in working through things like this too.
Well, there's always data loss.
Yes.
In translation, there's always data loss.
And the word that comes across dog here, I mean, anything that's talking about a dog, when it comes out of a language like Hebrew, when it comes to us, we're going to hear dog.
Yes.
Whether it is a mongrel dog, because that's what we would say, that little street dog, or that little scruffy looking, thing, or if we're in more rural areas, that wild dog, or something of that, or like even when we watch different, Scientific America or National Geographic, stuff like that, when they're talking about different parts of the world, like in Africa, you hear a lot about the wild dog, which looks a lot of like, us hear about a wolf, stuff like that. And that's what we say, a wild dog, that what we know. And at this time, there were house pets, stuff like that. And they were kept. We know that because he used the terminology. And when he talks here about that, there's a meaning that he's getting to, and that that when he says here, let me see, in verse number 27, and Jesus had to her, let the children be filled first, but it's not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the little dogs. That the little dog that the little dog he's referring to, is the dog outside, the mongrel, the scavenger, because the one kept inside would have just been dog. And so he's using a term that they were familiar with, but that they would also know that is not what is of them. It's not like the house pet. It's not theirs by nature. It's the one outside in the streets. That are roaming, that are lost, that have no detachment to anyone. But he's also, in the way he says it to the little dogs, he's letting her know, or he's trying to put across, is not the right way to say this. Christ is, what is being put across is that this little dog may not be in the family now, but will be.
So, are there two different words? For example, it's not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. Now, I like the NIV use of the term toss, as in you don't care about the kids. And Jesus' primary mission was to Israel. It was to the Jews. But then she replies, even the dogs under the table. So she's referring to pet dogs there, as opposed to the dogs you would throw the food to, the children's food out in the street for them. And see, this surprised me. And we talked about this earlier. So it surprised me that they had dogs as pets. But when you begin to think of it, he's in Tyre. He's not in Jerusalem. And so it would have been far more common to have inside dogs. I don't know what archaeology tells us about inside dogs among the Jews.
Yeah. Well, the diaspora was growing and had been growing, and as Jews started moving out, the strict traditions of their homeland and the strict traditions that they saw were starting to meld with traditions of other people. There were still lines defined, but those things were, it's just like when you move when you came from Colorado, to here, there were certain things about the Rocky Mountains that came with you and stayed a little bit, and there's certain things about here that when you go back, you refer here that way, and that's just the reality, of being life and the way that God built us. Everywhere you go, you're going to take something with you, and you're going to bring something back. Yeah, and so that was. Now I can't. The historians on this text. They let us know that the words were there, the mongrel dog or something like that. But as far as going down and saying what kind, and isolating it out, it said we don't do that. We can't do it, but we do know this, that's what it was referring to. Okay. And the implications of the text lets us know that he was leading her. He was leading her in.
He was guiding the argument. It looks like a blind insult, but the fact is he was leading her in an argument that was, how can we put this? Excuse me. Arguments were entertainment back then, and also ways of learning and ways of grouping and identifying. That's why you would have the people in Athens walking around finding a new argument. Yeah. It wasn't like mobs in the streets. This was logic. This was unfolding of truth, and it came through disputation. So he's setting that up to her. And if you noticed when he read, there were little dogs as a differentiation. Now, you don't always get that, but it's rather like the impure spirit. You get it from the context. And this is more complicated than even translation, because in translation, there's always data loss. And in looking back at another culture, there is always data loss, because you cannot know. These people lived in a cultural bubble that was very complex, and they didn't feel a need to explain all of that to people that were going to live 2,000 years later. So it's one of those reminders. The Bible was written for us, but it wasn't written to us. Therefore, Peter's sermons, Mark writing them down, didn't feel like they needed to footnote all of this. But information was lost after the fall of Jerusalem, after the Jews scattered, the diaspora, after the 1,500 years of active Jewish persecution. This information was lost. And so we have to go back and pick it up. And sometimes when I get confused over something Jesus said, I have to remind myself, who said it? It's Jesus. He's not going to be mean or dismissive. So he's doing something else here.
Yeah. If there was the kind of cancel culture then that is active, now, you just can imagine. Oh, they'd have been burning. They'd have been burning. Well, they weren't all bound together at the time, so they'd have been burning leaflets or, and putting people to the stakes. And that is not to say that you don't need to have critique on things. That I'm not saying that, but it would have. And we're looking back in time, and the interesting and the neat thing about religion, especially the Bible, is that the warts and the foils and the boggles and the bulges, everything is there for you to see and to look at and to deal with in the text. And God knows that we needed it to be that way, so we can always, remind ourselves, we are wounded people, we are hurt people moving toward a perfect and whole God. And on that journey, we find ourselves hopefully getting better, as we go on, but everybody to differing degrees. And God wants that, because that's what the world does to us. It beats people up. Some people would choose and spits out, just a wide variety. And so, and having to grapple with it is good for dialogue and discussion and understanding. And then to try to take it and say, okay, this is why I don't believe in the Bible, and this is why I don't like God, is to misunderstand that God was entering into culture. He was entering into this life and moving people along toward it. And in no place, does he say, like we might say, you're a dog, and not in the good sense. I mean, okay, if I'm talking about a football player, or something like that, and I'm going out to get one I want from my team, I want that dog over there, right there. I want one that's going to, get up in somebody's face, that kind of stuff. Not as opposed to when you look at, and maybe many of us, that person is worse than a dog. That person is a low down, mangy. That's another kind of thing. They may have done something worthy of it, but we're called by God never to damn people into anything permanently. Now, you can say you acted like a dog, but that's very different from saying it, because we're not God. We don't know where that person's heart going to go. You don't lock them in. Now, if they lock themselves in that cage and go with it, that's them. But it's important to keep that in mind, and at times be able to not laugh at a person because of a thing, but laugh with them. What would I think if I was hearing that about me?
Yeah, it's. By the way, there will be some people that will. I don't want to look at the camera to make sure they hear this. That will say something like, "Well, you're just saying Jesus couldn't have meant it bad because you don't want Jesus to look bad." Yeah, that's part of it. But I want to ask another question. Why would I feel the need to state that I believe Jesus wasn't insulting this person? Because as I said, I remember who said it. I know it had to be leading toward a positive. And the answer is, the Bible tells us that the Holy Spirit will reveal to us as we read more and more. The book alone is not it. The book points us to Jesus. We learn about Jesus, and we look at this and we go, all right, that seems like a blue parakeet on the back porch. It doesn't belong. Now we got to figure out why is it there and what's going on. Now her response, she says, Lord, but we have no way of knowing if she's saying Lord as in I believe you're the Messiah, or you seem to be an important fellow that heals people. But she shows him respect. And she goes, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. She's saying, I'm not asking you to abandon your mission. I'm not asking you to like Syrophoenicians better than Jews. I'm just saying, is there anything left over for us?
Exactly.
And I mean, right there, my heart breaks. But I go back to, I'm starting a new series, by the way, of sermons that you need to go back. We started it on the 19th, so just last Sunday, called The Always and Forever Messiah. And one of the sermons in December brings up when the angel of the Lord shows up, which is a different being. First time, Hagar, to a woman outside the covenant. In fact, the word Hagar means foreigner. We don't even know her real name. She was a slave in Egypt, given away to Abraham. And she's a nobody, and that's who God appears to outside the covenant, makes promises, helps them out, and there come the Arabic people, from there. So again, God is interested in these people. And Jesus' heart was hit with that, do you have time for us? I often remember Paul, and it bothered me as his boy, but he kept telling the Gentiles, you're saved and you're in, but don't think just because you're grafted in that you're better than the tree. And I think that humility sometimes we need to remember. The Jews are our older brothers and sisters. They haven't accepted Christ, and that bothers us. But the respect we show still needs to be there. But anyway, even the dogs. I'm talking too much. You got something you want to go with? Or?
No, what you're bringing up is good, because this is a part of these parts of this text really have to be grappled. I mean, it's like you're digging in with your fingernails and kind of moving stuff around, because the spirit inside is still troubled over, I don't like the way this is, but there's another side that comes. But this is what God was doing. So it's not about whether I like it or not. It's about maneuvering through it, getting to what the message is, and hopefully making sure that we don't polarize the message, or that we don't let the message become watered down because we don't like it so much. Because Certain people need to hear certain things a certain kind of way because that inspires them, and then a certain group of them, it motivates them and helps them to understand, okay, this is what the situation was. Let's move it to where God wants us to go. But if I can, what's going on here is really important. Verse 26, the woman was a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician by birth, and this is, remember, New King James Version, and she kept asking him. She kept asking him. You remember the woman that was mistreated that kept asking the king at the gate,
Right.
when are you going to do something about this? When it finally says the king, he said, okay, I'm going to respond and do it, not because I think so much of you and not or this, that, and the other, but I'm going to do it, simply because I'm king. So that kind of thing keeps showing up in biblical texts, and it lets us know that at this time, or keeps reminding us that that women were at the back of the bus. Women had no voice,
Yeah.
not even a head count, anything like that. But when Christ shows up, they're always a part of his economy.
That's amazing. And
Always.
exactly true. It's stunning once you start looking at this.
Exactly. They're always a part of his. A matter of fact, the original, group that he pulls together always had women in it. We talk about the men because that was a cultural way to write at it. Now, the reason that we're reading things the certain kind of way is something that falls under that thing of inspiration. How was it? And maybe we can do just one of these on that. Because inspiration, depending on how you grew up and what denomination you grew up, meant way different things than it really, biblically that we find it to be. And we start casting people out and stuff, or either saying it's not true because we don't understand how God worked in them through the Spirit, or as he's talking to them, and then how the Spirit opened up stuff, which is very important, to understanding how we apply the text. Because sometimes, at least in our faith tradition that we came from, certain texts that are written have no importance, although they're written just like the ones that have importance, because this one over here doesn't fit with what we want the end to be. Okay, and so in this particular text, the woman, she said he kept asking, and so that lets us know that there's some common movement, not just a showing up and a happening, but there's something that we're not privy to in the text because we don't need to see it. But there was some around because she kept asking, and that gives a sense that not just maybe in this period, in this moment, but she's been asking because, and remember, at this time, not even Jewish women had access to study and understanding. And so the women that were around Jesus were different. I'm not saying different group as in God created them special. They were different.
Jesus elevated them by allowing them to have a rabbi and be in the presence.
Exactly.
Now, this woman then most likely had been following Jesus and followed him into the house. And that's something we don't get.
Yeah.
Because he wouldn't have gone into, a Syrophoenician would not have gone into the wrong house, although this is Tyre.
Exactly.
She must have been begging him through the streets. He gets into the house. She may have been attracting the crowd that then finds Jesus is in the house because of that persistence thing.
Yeah, and she believes.
And she believes.
She has some faith here that whatever's been going on with my daughter, she's not getting any better, and which is a theme in these miracles. These are happening, but you can. I'm not giving up on you because I know. So she had seen something, she understood something, she heard something, but it was enough to invest herself in, which that theme is going to come up. It may come up in before we finish this discussion or in the next discussion for the next post that we have.
He says, for such a reply, you may go. The demon has left your daughter. And again, I'm not a Greek expert at all. In fact, I'm not even a Greek novice. I just find people that knows this stuff. But I'm very intrigued by the tense, as in, I've already taken care of it. So this exchange was for the listeners. It wasn't required for Jesus to heal her daughter. There's something going on in this exchange that the listeners were supposed to learn from. And I believe that it will come in it'll come back around this lesson in chapter 8 when he feeds the 4,000. And that idea of persistence and trust. He's going to do well. Jesus couldn't get knocked off his primary mission. That was true. But constantly, he brings in, like Samaritan woman, the Roman centurion. He brings in those outside the covenant to let you know that there's a difference between a primary mission and a solo mission. He's not here just for the Jews. He's here for these as well.
Yeah.
So
the demon's already gone. You know, the demon's gone. Now I can't reflect back and say, okay, looking into the future or futuristically thinking, I was saying, okay, there's going to come a time when they're trying to mimic what I'm doing, but it's not going to look like this. I can't do that because I would be hatcheting the text,
right.
you know, and it would appear that I was hatcheting the text to a side. I try to, you know, I think it's clear.
We do it all the time.
You know, and but the reality is, and almost every time when there's a miracle, the writer always lets us know that this thing happened. It happened immediately. It happened. Something in the text lets you know that it happened, as opposed to what basically we see going on in our world today. This healing happened, but it happened to nobody you know, anybody you know knows. Nobody, you know, it happened, and that's one thing. And then it happened gradually. There was a thing. There was this.
Right.
There was that, and then it happened. You know, it was Jesus. You know, and all the miracles that show up, just like here, they came home and found that the demon was already gone. Well, home doesn't mean we took a day's journey back there because
right.
the girl was right there. We went around the corner. We went there. You said,
right.
I already, you know, this already happened, and it happened without. And remember, Jesus had told them at the very beginning, don't say anything about this. So he wasn't doing it to broadcast, okay, tell them I did it so the people can show up, which lets us know in the Hebrew text and when we move through into the First Testament is that it's always about Jesus' presence is always there. He's always with us. We're going to come to feel it or know it through the indwelling presence of the Holy Spirit. But here he's with you, and when he's with you, the miracle is always there. If that makes sense, if I'm not muddling the water, it's always there as opposed to a show.
Right.
Although they were,
yeah, he went out of his way to never let it be a show, and that was, he didn't even at the feeding of the 5,000 stand up and say, "Right, watch this."
Yeah. He
told the apostles, gather things together, and you put them in groups, and you distribute the food. Even though he was doing the miracle, and the people obviously would have wondered where the food came from, Jesus seems like he didn't say a word about it. And again, the abundance of blessings that are in our own lives, Jesus doesn't have to show up every time saying, "Hey, that's me." We know he makes these blessings flow, and on the righteous and the unrighteous. But he takes special care of people, and he did tell us. He's the one that told us the parable, saying, when you talk to my Father and you ask for something, be like this persistent widow. Be like this woman that wouldn't leave a king alone. Just keep hammering heaven and don't stop. And I find that interesting because I had two older sisters. And every now and then, one of them would lean over and tell me how I should approach Dad or Mom, because they'd had the experience. And it just tickles me that Jesus is leaning over and said, now there's something about my dad. If you're going to casually pray, he's going to casually think about it. But if you just keep coming, even though you have no standing, you're going to get through. And I like that. I really do. We're coming up toward the end of our 30 minutes, and we've got about another 5 minutes to go. We're going to come, however, I want you to look at the context, if you would, please. We have just had the feeding, which is, pretty exciting. And then we had the crossing of the water, and then about what commands are we following. Then this hits. We're going to have another rather amazing healing, and then we're going to get into a miracle that shows us we have a problem trusting Jesus. and that's the feeding of the 4,000. So this is day before Thanksgiving, so we're going to shut this down. We're going to cut this off here, give you a little bit of extra time, and then next week we will run back at this again, full bore.
Okay.
Thank you, Rick.
All right.